My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 32 years old, and the first time my mother-in-law handed me rules for my own house, she did it at my kitchen table like she was doing me a favor. It was 8:52 on a Thursday night in March. I remember the time because I had just sat down with a plastic container of soup from the hospital cafeteria, too tired to heat it properly, when the doorbell rang. Not once, 3 times. Sharp, impatient presses that made my shoulders tighten before I even stood up. Outside, the rain was coming down in thin silver lines under the porch light. Marlene Monroe stood there in a cream wool coat, her gray hair pinned neatly, two hard-sided suitcases beside her like she had already decided the answer would be yes. "Rachel," she said, "my pipes burst. I just need a place for 2 or 3 weeks." Caleb had been gone 22 months by then, long enough for people to stop checking on me, not long enough for me to stop hearing his boots in the hallway when the house got quiet. So I stepped aside. Because she was his mother. Because grief makes you generous in ways common sense would warn you against. 20 minutes later, after I had given her clean towels and showed her the guest room, Marlene opened her leather tote and pulled out a laminated sheet of paper. She laid it flat on my kitchen table. At the top, in neat black letters, it said, "Household expectations. Dinner at 6:30. Work files kept out of common spaces. Guests approved in advance. Caleb's old room preserved for family use. Wedding photos moved from the main living area because, according to the note, they kept everyone stuck in grief." I read it twice. Then I looked at her. Marlene tapped the page with one polished fingernail and smiled softly. "I know this is your house on paper, Rachel," she said, "but it was my son's home before it was ever yours." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I looked past her at our wedding photo on the living room wall, at Caleb smiling like forever was still guaranteed. Then I said, "You can stay in the guest room." I thought I was helping a grieving mother. I didn't know she had come to reclaim a life that was never hers to take. Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet your phone battery is at 16% right now, right? If that's true, type 1. If not, type 2. Let's see whether I got it right. All right, enough talking. Let's begin the story. Caleb and I bought that house in the fall of 2019, when we were still young enough to think exhaustion was something a weekend could fix. It sat on the edge of Dayton, a 3-bedroom ranch with beige siding, a narrow front porch, and a maple tree that dropped leaves into the gutters every October, like it had a personal grudge against us. The dishwasher made a grinding sound if you loaded the plates wrong. The back door stuck whenever it rained. In the garage, near the workbench, there was still a blue paint stain from the night Caleb knocked over half a can while we were repainting the guest room. He promised for 3 years he would clean it up on Saturday. He never said which Saturday. We paid $286,000 for that house. No one handed us the down payment. No one surprised us with furniture. Caleb picked up overtime at the fire station, and I took Saturday appointments at the pediatric therapy clinic until my legs ached from kneeling beside treatment mats and helping little kids practice steps their parents prayed they would someday take without help. Most nights, Caleb came home smelling faintly of smoke, antiseptic, and cold air. He would kiss the top of my head, open the fridge, and ask what broke while he was gone. That was how he loved me. Quietly, practically, with a screwdriver in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. He built a small shelf beside the side door because I was always losing my keys. It leaned a little to the left, though he swore it was level. He replaced the porch light after I tripped coming home late from work. He planted 2 hydrangeas under the front window because I once mentioned my grandmother had them. One died the first winter, the other survived, lopsided and stubborn, and Caleb said, that meant it belonged with us. Marlene walked through the house once before we closed. She ran her hand along the kitchen counter, looked toward the hallway, and said, "It's small, but Caleb can make anything work." I laughed then. I thought she was being proud of him. I didn't understand she had already separated the house in her mind. Caleb's effort, Caleb's future, Caleb's home. I was just the woman standing beside him in the doorway. When Caleb died, people told me the house must feel too big. They were wrong. It felt too quiet. Quiet has a weight when it belongs to someone who used to come home loud. His jacket stayed on the hook by the garage door for weeks. His boots sat on the mat, one leaning into the other like he had only kicked them off for a minute. At night, the refrigerator hummed so clearly, it felt like the house was trying not to breathe. The mortgage still had $211,000 left on it. Caleb's life insurance policy paid $225,000. I used it to pay the house off because I could not survive losing him, and then watched the bank take the only place where his absence still had shape. After he died, the paperwork put the house fully in my name. I understood that much. The bank understood it. The county records understood it. I just never imagined that one day I would have to prove it at my own kitchen table to a woman who thought motherhood outranked a deed. Marlene did not take over all at once. That would have been easier to fight. At first, she moved through my house in small, careful adjustments, the kind you almost feel rude for noticing. The second morning, my coffee mugs were on a different shelf. She said the cabinet by the sink made more sense. The next day, my therapy bag had been moved from the bench near the door to the laundry room because medical things make guests uncomfortable. On Sunday, she lowered the thermostat to 68 and said Caleb had always preferred the house cooler. She said his name so gently I felt guilty reaching for a sweater. So I let things go. That is how it starts, I think. Not with surrender. With one small silence you tell yourself is kindness. By the end of the first week, I came home late in navy scrubs, my hair loose from its clip, my shoulders aching from a long day at the clinic. One little girl had cried through half her session because her new braces rubbed behind her knees, and I had stayed late helping her mother adjust the straps. I was tired in that deep way that makes unlocking your own front door feel like work. I stepped inside and stopped. The wedding photo was gone. For a moment, the wall above the console table looked too clean, too bare of me. In its place hung a framed picture of Caleb at 17, broad-shouldered and grinning in a football jersey, with Marlene standing beside him in a red church dress, her hand pressed proudly against his chest. My keys slipped from my fingers and hit the floor. Marlene came from the kitchen holding a dish towel. "Oh," she said, as if she had forgotten to mention the mail. "I put yours in the hall closet." Mine. Not our wedding photo. Not Caleb and Rachel. Just mine. I turned toward her. "Why would you do that?" She folded the towel once, then again. "This room should show Caleb's whole life, not just the part where he belonged to you." The house went very quiet. "He was my husband," I said. "And he was my son first." She stepped closer, soft-faced, almost tender, and laid her hand on my shoulder. I could smell her lavender hand cream. "You had him for 5 years, Rachel. I had him for 34. I did not answer. Some sentences are designed to end a conversation by cutting the person in half. I found the photo wedged behind a plastic wreath and a box of Christmas candles. The glass had a thin scratch near the corner. Caleb had hung that picture himself, using a level, stepping back 3 times until it was straight. He said it mattered because it was the first thing people saw when they came in. I carried it to the bedroom and sat on the floor with the frame across my knees until the light outside turned gray. That night, I understood Marlene wasn't making room for Caleb's memory. She was making sure there was less and less room for mine. The next morning, Marlene did not mention the wedding photo. She was already in the kitchen when I came out, standing at the counter in one of her pale cardigans with a stack of yellow sticky notes and a black marker. My coffee maker had been shifted to the other side of the sink. The toaster was unplugged and tucked into a lower cabinet. A label on the pantry door said dry goods in Marlene's careful handwriting, as if the house had been waiting all this time for someone competent to arrive. On the refrigerator, beneath the laminated sheet, she had added a new note. Family spaces should reflect family history. I stood there long enough for the words to blur. Marlene turned and smiled. "I thought that might help us all stay mindful." Us. There were 2 people living in that house, and only one of us had needed permission to be there. After that, anything connected to my work began disappearing from sight. The laminated exercise sheets I kept near the door vanished into a drawer because, she said, guests didn't need reminders of work. My small step platform was moved to the coat closet. The side table where I sorted patient notes at night became a place for Caleb's framed academy picture and a white candle Marlene lit every morning. By Wednesday, she was answering my door. I came home and found Mrs. Alvarez from 2 houses down, standing on the porch with a casserole dish. Marlene stood between us, one hand on the doorframe. "Rachel's just getting in," she said, as though speaking for a teenager who had missed curfew. "She keeps such long hours." Mrs. Alvarez looked embarrassed. "I only wanted to bring this by." I stepped around Marlene and took the dish. "Thank you. That was kind." After I closed the door, Marlene said, "You should let me manage drop-ins while I'm here. People don't always know what's appropriate." That was the thing about Marlene. She could make control sound like manners. A few days later, I found the first church ladies in my living room. 6 of them sat in a half circle, drinking tea from the white and gold cups Caleb and I had received as a wedding gift from my aunt in Michigan. I had never used those cups. Marlene had found them anyway. "Oh, Rachel," she said when I walked in. "We were just praying over Caleb's home." Not my home, not our home, Caleb's. One woman, in a soft pink sweater, smiled at me. "Are you Caleb's wife?" Before I could answer, Marlene said, "Widow. She's his widow." The correction landed quietly, but it landed. Wife was a living word. Widow was a word people lowered their voices around. Widow made me smaller. Widow made me temporary. That night, I carried my laptop to the bedroom because Marlene had started using my office for Caleb's old photo albums. She called it the memory room now. My desk was pushed against the wall. A framed picture of Caleb in his academy uniform sat where my appointment calendar used to be. When I told her I needed my office back, she looked wounded. "I'm not erasing your work, Rachel. I'm honoring my son." I wanted to say Caleb had honored my work. He had packed my lunches when I had early patients. He had listened to me talk about children learning to stand after everyone said they might not. Instead, I said, "Please don't move my files again." Marlene looked past me into the room. "Then don't leave them in common areas." Common areas. I stood in the hallway and felt something inside me shift. Not break, just shift. A quiet click of understanding. She was not visiting anymore. She was dividing my house into spaces she could rename. By the second week, I had started moving differently. I closed cabinets softly. I kept my coat in my bedroom. I checked the living room before turning on the television. I stopped leaving my shoes by the side door. I was not afraid of Marlene. Not exactly. But I had begun asking permission without using words. And that, more than any rule she taped to my refrigerator, was when my house first stopped feeling like mine. The next Sunday, her daughter Tessa came over with lemon cake and a folder full of house values. Tessa Monroe arrived the next Sunday at 2:15 with a lemon cake in a glass dish and a folder tucked under her arm. That was Tessa's way. She never came empty-handed, but she never came without a purpose either. She was 29, Caleb's younger sister, with smooth dark hair, a bright real estate office smile, and the kind of confidence people get when they have learned to turn someone else's uncertainty into paperwork. Marlene brightened the second she saw her. "There you are," she said, taking the cake like she had been waiting for it. I was standing at the sink, rinsing a coffee mug. I noticed the folder before I noticed the dessert. Tessa kissed Marlene on the cheek, then looked around my kitchen like she was seeing measurements instead of walls. Her eyes moved from the breakfast nook to the hallway, then toward the den. "You know," she said lightly, "this layout has more potential than I remembered." I set the mug in the drying rack. "Potential for what?" She smiled at me. "Don't panic. Nobody's pressuring you. Nobody begins a harmless conversation by telling you not to panic." Marlene cut 3 slices of cake, even though I had not said I wanted any. Tessa sat at my kitchen table and opened the folder. Inside were printed pages. Zillow estimates. Recent sales nearby. Property tax projections. A house 3 streets over had sold for $421,500. Another, smaller than mine, had gone pending in 6 days. Tessa tapped one page with her fingernail. Your place could probably bring around $419,000 right now, she said. Maybe more if the den were converted properly. My place. The words should have reassured me. They did not. Why are you looking up my house value? I asked. Marlene lowered her fork. Rachel, we're only thinking ahead. About what? Tessa leaned back, gentle and businesslike at the same time. About everyone's future. You're young. One day, you may remarry, you may move, you may have children with someone else. The kitchen seemed to shrink around me. Marlene looked down at her untouched cake. But Caleb won't have another home. I kept my hands flat on the counter because I did not trust them anywhere else. Caleb made this home with me. Legally, sure, Tessa said, but morally, it's more complicated. There it was. The word people use when the law does not give them what they want. Morally. Tessa pulled out another document, clipped neatly at the corner. Across the top it said, Family Preservation Agreement. It sounded harmless, almost noble. Like something you would sign to protect old photographs or keep a cemetery plot clean. Then I started reading. If I sold the house, the Monroe family would have first right to purchase. If I remarried, Marlene would have to be notified in writing. If the property were sold, a portion of the proceeds would be recognized as Caleb's family interest. I looked up slowly. What family interest? Marlene's eyes filled before any tears fell. She had always been good at that part. He was our son. He was my husband. Tessa slid the paper closer. No one is taking that from you, Rachel. But the document in front of me was trying to do exactly that. Not with shouting, not with threats, with clean margins and soft words. I turned the page and saw the sentence that made the room tilt. To prevent transfer of the property outside the Monroe bloodline. Bloodline. I heard it like a lock turning. For a moment, I saw the house, the way they must have seen it. Not as the place where I had learned to sleep on one side of the bed. Not as the kitchen where I still made coffee for one because throwing away Caleb's mug felt too final. Not as the hallway I walked through on nights when missing him had weight. Just equity. Access. A number printed in black ink. I slid the agreement back across the table. I'm not signing this. Marlene pressed a napkin to the corner of her eye. No one asked you to sign today. Not today. That was the part I heard. That night, after they went to bed, I found the folder still on the kitchen table. Maybe Tessa had forgotten it. Maybe she wanted me to read it again and feel guilty enough to change my mind. I sat on the laundry room floor with the agreement across my knees while the dryer turned beside me, warm and steady and indifferent. I had opened my door to a grieving mother. I had not realized I was also opening it to a family that believed their grief had a claim number, a dollar amount, and a bloodline. I did not call Olivia that night because I wanted someone to fix it. I called because I needed to hear another human being say I was not crazy. She answered on the second ring. There was noise behind her, monitors beeping, someone calling for a nurse, the low chaos of an emergency room that never really slept. Ray? She said. What happened? I sat on the laundry room floor, with the dryer humming beside me and the agreement still across my knees. For a second, I could not make the words line up. Then I told her everything. Not all at once. In pieces. The house rules, the wedding photo, the church ladies, the memory room, Tessa's folder. The word bloodline sitting in the middle of a legal-looking document like I was some temporary problem their family needed to solve. Olivia did not interrupt. That was one of the things I loved about her. She had spent too many years in emergency rooms to panic before she understood the injury. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Rachel, if Caleb were alive, would he let them talk to you this way? I closed my eyes. That question hurt because the answer was so immediate. No, I whispered. Then stop letting grief speak for him. The next evening, Olivia came over with chicken soup, crusty bread, and the expression she wore when she was trying not to fight someone in public. Marlene answered the door before I could reach it. She looked Olivia up and down. "Will you be staying long?" Olivia smiled politely. "Long enough to see my friend." For the first time in days, I almost laughed. We ate at the kitchen table while Marlene moved around us, wiping counters that were already clean. Olivia noticed everything. The photo missing from the main wall. My laptop bag tucked beside my bedroom door. The folders stacked where my patient files used to be. She said nothing until we stepped out onto the back porch. The air was cold enough to make my hands ache. I told her I felt cruel for even thinking about asking Marlene to leave. Olivia leaned against the railing. "Grief explains pain," she said. "It doesn't give anyone a deed." The next morning, June Calloway came over from next door with banana bread wrapped in foil. June was 68, a retired hospice nurse with silver hair, steady hands, and the kind of eyes that had seen families at their best and worst. She looked past me into the hallway, then back at my face. "You sleeping?" she asked. "Some. That means no." I smiled because she was right. Outside by the driveway, she nodded toward the house. "Honey, people don't take a home by carrying it away. They take it by making you ask permission to breathe in it." I did not answer. I did not need to. By the time June walked back across the lawn, the separate pieces had become one clear picture. Marlene was not tidying. Tessa was not planning. They were preparing. And I was done pretending I could survive it by being polite. It happened on a Thursday near the end of April. I remember because it had rained all afternoon, the kind of cold spring rain that makes the whole world look unfinished. I came home late from the clinic, with damp cuffs on my scrub pants and a headache sitting behind my eyes. One of my patients had taken 3 independent steps that day, and his mother cried into her hands right there beside the parallel bars. It should have been the kind of day I carried home like a small light. Instead, I pulled into my driveway and saw Tessa's car. The kitchen light was on. I could see 2 shadows moving behind the curtains. I almost went in through the front door, but my key slipped from my hand and landed near the side steps. When I bent to pick it up, I heard Marlene's voice through the cracked kitchen window. "She won't sign if we make it sound legal." I froze. Tessa answered, lower but clear. "Then don't make it legal. Make it emotional." My fingers closed around the key so tightly the ridges bit into my palm. Marlene sighed. "The memorial is perfect. Everyone will be here. Church friends, family, Caleb's station. She won't embarrass me in front of them." For a second, I could not breathe. The memorial. Caleb's 2-year memorial was supposed to be a day for people to say his name without turning it into a weapon. I had agreed to host it because Marlene said she needed closure, because I thought maybe grief shared in one room might become lighter. Tessa said, "You speak first. Talk about legacy. Talk about how a mother never stops protecting her child. Then I'll bring out the agreement." Marlene was quiet. Then she said, "If Rachel remarries, some stranger could sleep in my son's bedroom." I closed my eyes. I had not gone on a date. I had not taken Caleb's shirts out of the closet. Some mornings, I still turned my head before remembering he would not, but in Marlene's mouth, my future had already become a betrayal. Tessa's voice sharpened. "Then don't let her reach that future, with the house still in her name." The side of the house seemed to tilt. I stepped back carefully, one foot, then the other. I went around to the front door and let myself in loud enough for them to hear. When I entered the kitchen, Tessa was closing the folder. Marlene smiled too quickly. "You're home," she said. "Yes," I answered. My voice sounded normal. That surprised me. I went to my bedroom, shut the door, and stood there in the dark. The wedding photo still leaned against the wall, waiting for me to be brave enough to hang it again. I touched the edge of the frame. "I'm sorry," I whispered to Caleb. "I let it go too far." Then I picked up my phone. This time, my hand shook. Not from fear, from finally understanding that kindness had become the door they were using to get inside. I searched for the number Olivia had sent me that morning. Adrian Cole, estate attorney. When he answered, I said, "My name is Rachel Monroe. My husband died almost 2 years ago. His mother is living in my house, and I need to know exactly what she can and cannot take from me. There was a pause. Then his voice came through, calm and steady. Bring the deed, he said. Bring the insurance records. Bring anything they gave you in writing, even if it feels small. Adrian Cole's office was on the third floor of an old brick building downtown, above a tax preparer and a dentist who had a plastic molar hanging in the front window. I remember noticing that molar as I stood on the sidewalk with a blue folder pressed against my chest, because grief does strange things to your attention. It lets you focus on a giant fake tooth, so you do not have to think about the deed inside your bag. The elevator smelled like floor polish and old paper. My reflection in the metal doors looked pale, older than 32. I had put on black slacks and a gray sweater because I did not know what a person wore to ask whether her dead husband's family could take her home. Adrian met me in the waiting room himself. He was in his mid-40s, calm face, no dramatic handshake, no sympathy voice. Just a nod, and a quiet, "Mrs. Monroe, come in." His office had 2 windows, a walnut desk, and shelves full of binders labeled with words that suddenly felt heavier than they used to: probate, trusts, survivorship, beneficiary disputes. I sat in the chair across from him and placed the folder on his desk. For a moment, I did not open it. Adrian waited. That was the first thing I liked about him. He did not rush pain just because he billed by the hour. Finally, I slid everything out. The deed, Caleb's death certificate, the mortgage payoff letter, the life insurance documents, the copy of the household expectations sheet I had taken a picture of before Marlene could move it, photos of my office before and after, screenshots of Tessa's messages about house values, the family preservation agreement, with that word bloodline sitting in the middle of the page like a stain. Adrian read without interrupting. Not once did he say, "I'm sure she means well." Not once did he ask whether I had tried being more understanding. Not once did he make Marlene's grief larger than my rights. He put the deed on top of the stack and turned it toward me. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, "this house is yours." I knew that. The bank knew that. The county knew that. Every signed page in front of us knew that. But hearing a stranger say it out loud in a room full of law books made my throat close. Adrian continued, his voice even. "You and your husband owned the property jointly, with right of survivorship. Upon his death, full ownership passed to you. The life insurance policy named you as beneficiary. You used those funds to satisfy the mortgage. There is no legal ownership interest here for Mrs. Monroe or Miss Tessa Monroe." I stared at the agreement. "What about this?" His expression changed only slightly. Not shock. Something colder. "This is not something I would advise you to sign." She said it was about legacy. "It is about control." The word landed cleanly. No decoration around it. Adrian picked up the page again. "They are using emotional pressure where legal rights do not exist." I looked down at my hands. They were folded tightly in my lap, fingers locked like I was trying to hold myself together by force. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I didn't assume you did. I just want my house to feel like mine again." His face softened then, not with pity, but recognition. "That is a reasonable thing to want." Before I left, he gave me instructions. "Do not sign anything. Do not argue alone. Save every text, every email, every note, photograph changes, write dates down. If someone came to measure, repair, remodel, or inspect anything without my consent, get a name and a company." Facts, he said, had a way of staying calm when people did not. So I became calm. On the outside, at least. When Marlene moved my mail into a drawer, I took a picture. When Tessa sent a listing from 2 streets over with the message, "Just so you understand the market," I saved it. When Marlene emailed relatives about Caleb's memorial and called the house the Monroe family home, I forwarded it to Adrian. When a window contractor knocked on my door the following week and said he was there to give Marlene an estimate, I asked for his card and smiled. Every small thing went into a file. Nothing dramatic. Just facts. 2 weeks before the memorial, Marlene found me washing a coffee cup at the sink and said, "We should probably put the signing table on the patio. More room out there." I turned off the water. For 1 second, I wanted to ask her what kind of mother uses her son's memorial as a closing appointment. Instead, I dried my hands on a towel and looked out toward the backyard, where Caleb used to grill burgers in the rain, because he said weather was only a suggestion. "The patio should be fine," I said. Marlena smiled. So did I. The morning of Caleb's memorial arrived bright and almost disrespectfully beautiful. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor before 7, pale gold through the windows Marlene had wanted to replace. The grass in the backyard still held beads of dew. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started, stopped, then started again. It sounded like any other Saturday in May, which felt wrong. Some days should look the way they feel. Marlene was already dressed when I came downstairs. Navy dress, pearl earrings, a white cardigan folded over one arm. She had arranged framed photos of Caleb across the living room while I was asleep. Caleb at 5 with a plastic fire truck. Caleb in his academy uniform. Caleb beside Marlene at a church picnic. Caleb holding a fishing pole at 12. All true pieces of him. Not the whole truth. My wedding photo was not there. I walked to my bedroom, lifted the frame from the dresser, and wiped the glass with the sleeve of my black dress. Then I carried it back and placed it on the console table near the front door. Marlene saw me do it. Her mouth tightened, but she said nothing. By 9, Tessa arrived with cream-colored folders and a new box of pens. She set them on the patio table like she was preparing for a board meeting instead of a memorial. Each folder had Caleb's name printed at the top. Caleb Monroe Family Preservation Agreement. Olivia came at 10:30 and hugged me without speaking. June brought deviled eggs and squeezed my wrist as she passed. A few men from Caleb's old station stood near the fence in navy polo shirts, talking quietly with paper cups of coffee in their hands. Captain Ross Whitcomb looked older than I remembered, but when he saw Caleb's picture, he took off his cap. For a while, it almost felt like what I had hoped it might be. People told stories. Real ones. Caleb burning pancakes on his first overnight shift. Caleb carrying an elderly woman's groceries after a medical call because she had no one else. Caleb sending the same terrible birthday meme 3 years in a row. I laughed once. It surprised me. Then, at 1:15, Marlene tapped a spoon against her glass. The yard slowly quieted. She stood near the patio steps, one hand pressed to her chest, and spoke about her son in a voice soft enough to make people lean in. She talked about his courage, his kindness, his duty. I hated that every word was true. Then her tone changed. "And because we love Caleb," she said, looking around the yard, "we have a responsibility to protect what he left behind." Tessa reached for the top folder. Marlene turned toward me, with tears shining in her eyes. "Sweetheart," she said, "Caleb would want you to sign this." Tessa placed the folder in front of me like an offering. For a second, all I could hear was the soft hiss of the grill behind Captain Ross and the distant laughter of a child chasing bubbles near the fence. The folder sat on the patio table, cream-colored, clean, and cruel. Caleb's name was printed across the top in black ink, as if they had borrowed him to make the paper look holy. Marlene's hand rested on my shoulder. "This isn't about taking anything from you," she said. "It's about keeping Caleb's home with family." I looked at her fingers on my dress, then at the folder. "Which family?" I asked. Her hand tightened. Before she could answer, a voice came from the side gate. "That is exactly what needs to be clarified." Adrian Cole walked into the backyard in a gray suit, carrying a leather portfolio. He did not hurry. He did not look angry. Somehow, that made him more powerful. Tessa turned sharply. "Who are you?" I stood up. My knees felt weak, but my voice did not. "My attorney." The silence changed shape. Marlene stepped back from me. "Rachel, this is a private family matter." Adrian looked at the folders on the table, then at the guests standing around us. Private family matters usually do not involve printed agreements and witnesses. No one laughed. He opened his portfolio and removed a stack of papers. Mrs. Monroe asked me to clarify the legal status of this property before she was pressured to sign anything regarding it. Tessa's face flushed. No one pressured her. Adrian placed the first document on the table. Rachel and Caleb Monroe purchased this home jointly in 2019. Upon Mr. Monroe's death, full ownership transferred to Rachel Monroe by right of survivorship. Marlene's mouth opened. He continued. The mortgage was paid using life insurance funds, for which Rachel Monroe was the named beneficiary. There is no ownership interest held by Marlene Monroe. There is no ownership interest held by Tessa Monroe. And there is no legal concept called a Monroe bloodline interest. The words landed one at a time. Adrian set down the family preservation agreement next, then the household expectations sheet, then copies of Tessa's messages about property values, then Marlene's email calling my house the Monroe family home. Finally, he pointed to one highlighted line. Make it emotional, not legal. Tessa went still. Adrian said, the wording is yours. June lowered her eyes. Olivia stood beside me without touching me, which somehow steadied me more than if she had. Captain Ross looked at Marlene. Caleb loved his wife. We all knew that. Marlene's face crumpled. You don't understand what it is to lose a son. No, I said quietly. I don't. I looked at the wedding photo near the door, then back at her. But I do understand what it is to have someone use grief as a key to my front door. Marlene shook her head. I was trying to keep him close. I never tried to take Caleb from you, I said. But you tried to take the home he built with me. For the first time since she had moved in, Marlene had no rule left to hand me. Tessa reached for the folders first. It was quick, almost instinctive, the way someone grabs for a glass after knocking it over. Her fingers closed around the top copy of the agreement, but Olivia stepped forward and placed one hand flat on the page. That stays, she said. Tessa glared at her. This is family business. Olivia did not move. Then stop treating my friend like paperwork. Nobody spoke for a moment. The backyard, which had been full of soft voices and paper plates an hour earlier, felt like a room after a verdict. Marlene lowered herself into one of the patio chairs. She looked smaller suddenly, her white cardigan slipping off one shoulder, her pearls no longer neat against her throat. I thought I would feel satisfaction. I didn't. Mostly, I felt tired. Tired of proving my own name on my own deed. Tired of hearing Caleb's memory used like a password. Tired of standing in the middle of my own home while other people decided how much of my grief made me obedient. Adrian handed me a single sheet from his portfolio. My hands were steady when I took it. I placed it on the table in front of Marlene. You have 10 days to move out, I said. She looked up as if I had slapped her. Rachel. My attorney prepared the notice. You're no longer welcome to live here. Tessa let out a sharp laugh. So that's it? You humiliate her in front of everyone, and now you throw out a grieving mother? I turned to her. No. She tried to corner me in front of everyone. I just stopped pretending I didn't see it. Marlene pressed a hand to her mouth. Caleb would be ashamed of you. That one still hurt. Maybe it always would. But for the first time, it did not move me. Caleb would be ashamed, I said. That his name was printed on papers he never wrote. Captain Ross looked down at the grass. June wiped her eyes with a folded napkin. Around the yard, people began to understand that there was nothing more to defend. I took a breath. I'll pay for 2 weeks at a hotel while you find somewhere else, I told Marlene. Not because you deserve it, because I want you out, not destroyed. Marlene stared at me like kindness offended her more than anger would have. Adrian closed his portfolio. Any further pressure, unwanted entry, or attempts to obtain a signature will be documented formally. Tessa opened her mouth, then closed it. One by one, people started leaving. No one made a speech. No one took Marlene's side out loud. That silence was not empty. It was consequence. That evening, after the last car pulled away, I stood alone in the living room with the wedding photo in my hands. The wall above the console table still had two small nail holes where it used to hang. I found the hammer in the kitchen drawer. And this time, I hung it myself. Marlene moved out 10 days later. She did not apologize. Tessa did not come to help. A small white van pulled into the driveway just after 9, and two men carried out the suitcases, the garment bags, the boxes of church binders, and the framed photos Marlene had placed around my living room like proof of ownership. I stayed in the kitchen while they worked. Not hiding. Not helping. When Marlene reached the door, she turned back. For a moment, she looked less angry than lost, and that almost broke something in me. Then she said, "One day, you'll understand what it feels like to lose everything." I looked at her hand on the doorknob. "I do understand," I said. "That's why I'm not letting you take what I have left." She left without another word. After the van pulled away, I changed the locks. Not because I hated her, because peace needs a door that closes. The house felt strange for a few days. Not empty exactly, more like it was exhaling after holding its breath too long. I moved my coffee maker back. I took the sticky notes off the refrigerator. I returned my patient files to the office and placed Caleb's academy photo on one shelf, not in the center of the room. A memory can have a place without becoming a throne. I kept one small picture of Marlene and Caleb from a church picnic. I put it beside the window in the hallway. She had been his mother. That was true, it just had never made me less his wife. 3 months later, I turned the office into a small therapy room for children who needed extra help after school. A low mat on the floor, resistance bands in a basket, stickers in the top drawer. Caleb's firefighter photo hung near the door, watching over the room in that quiet way he used to watch over everything. 6 months after Marlene left, a letter came in her handwriting. There were no excuses. Not exactly an apology either. Just one sentence I read 3 times. I thought keeping Caleb's house would keep Caleb close. I folded it and placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness can arrive before trust. Trust takes longer. Sometimes it never comes back the same shape. These days, the wedding photo hangs where it belongs. The back door still sticks when it rains. The maple still drops, leaves into the gutters every October. And some evenings, when the house is quiet, I can miss Caleb without feeling like I have to surrender the life we built. Grief can explain why someone reaches for what is not theirs. But it does not make it theirs. Love does not require surrender. Family does not mean signing away your peace. And sometimes, the real rules of a home are simple. The person who built a life there gets to decide who stays. The lesson Rachel's story leaves behind is not just about a house, it is about the quiet places in life where we confuse love with surrender. Many people are raised to believe that keeping peace means staying silent. We tell ourselves, it's only one comment, it's only one small favor. They're grieving, they're family. I can handle it. And sometimes, for a while, we can. But peace that requires you to disappear is not peace. It is permission for someone else to keep taking pieces of you until you no longer recognize your own life. Family should be a place of safety, not a reason to ignore disrespect. Love should make room for your grief, your memories, your future, and your voice. It should not demand that you hand over your dignity just to prove you are kind. Rachel did not win because she became cruel. She won because she finally understood that boundaries are not punishment. Boundaries are protection. They are the fence around the life you have survived too much to rebuild again from ashes. And that is something many people learn the hard way. Sometimes the person hurting you is not a stranger. Sometimes they speak softly. Sometimes they bring food. Sometimes they say, family, while reaching for something that belongs to you. That is why wisdom matters. That is why documents matter. That is why your own quiet instincts matter when something feels wrong. Grief can explain pain, but it cannot excuse control. Love can forgive, but it should not erase truth. And being a good person does not mean becoming an easy target for people who know exactly which wound to press. Rachel kept her home, but more than that, she kept herself. She learned that healing does not always look like letting everyone back in. Sometimes healing looks like changing the locks, hanging the photo back on the wall, and breathing freely in a room that finally feels like yours again. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your self-respect? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next story.